It's like any other other relationship, you know. You kind of go in, get out, go in, get out, until you realize you just need to be alone for a while, and then you begin to realize what you enjoy most and what qualities you're looking for, and then you kind of go out there and look for it, which makes your life very difficult because then your world shrinks. Writing is very much the same way. First you think you know a lot of things, that you know how to write and think and feel the right way, and time passes, you realize you're incompetent in many ways, then you kind of get sad and depressed, and then you're lonely, then you feel as if everyone and everything has abandoned you. And then hopefully you'll get a chance to kind of think about things in a different way. And then you'll have strange feelings, and then you'll have to wrestle with them. And then if your life allows, you'll kind of sit and write. Maybe you'll have a nice paragraph before you die. Something to look forward to. Paul?
I guess I'll look at the question. So, as far as like the grading of it goes, I understand.
The what goes?
The grading.
The grading, yeah.
Is it based on getting the paper in and what you would consider quality prompts? Because I know like the quality of the work may not be at its best. So, are you grading based upon completion or also what's inside?
Do you ask because you want to pass the class? Do you ask because you're just curious about...
I think I'm more curious. I mean, I understand where when you say the depth or the depth of our teachers. I can understand how we may be in a place where maybe we'll be later on in life, or even if we are able to tap into that now. So I'm just curious to know.
Well, let's talk about the grading system, but one that's beyond this class, just in school, and beyond school, maybe just in life in general. I'll tell you a story that comes from one of the heroes and visionaries of the 20th century, Malcolm X. Because if you were to kind of run into him at different stages in life, no doubt you would have failed him. Okay? But then something happens to him where his only grade is an A. And when he comes to a certain place in life, it's no longer us grading him, but him grading us. Which kind of makes the academic grading system a bit ridiculous. So let me just tell you briefly about his life. And I don't know very much about his life, especially, people are immensely complex. So their inner world, for the most part, remains a mystery because a lot of things can't really be put in language. So, you have a young kid. He is black, and he is in America. That in itself is problematic, being black in America. The sort of emotions you have, the sort of kind of things you begin to think about as you walk the streets, as you see your neighborhoods. When 9/11 happened, this was in 2001, I was teaching at a place called Sierra College in Rockland. Population, I think, way back then was about 16 or 17,000. 95% of the population student body was Caucasian, white. We had a few Middle Easterners, one being me, the instructor, a couple of Indians. We had maybe 2 or 3 African Americans. And I was teaching at this place for a while. And so when 9/11 happened, I was teaching my first class at 9 in the morning on Tuesday. And I walk into the classroom, and the first question that the students asked was, "Do you know where Osama bin Laden is?" Okay. And then as I walked the streets, because I lived in Roseville for a number of years, I noticed that people are looking at me a little weirdly, or maybe it was a projection on my part. Okay. And it made me so angry. It's really upsetting that here I am just walking, with my family, and there's this guy sitting, drinking his coffee, smoking his cigar, and looking at me, and probably thinking, "You Middle Eastern terrorists, why don't you go back to your country?" Okay. Now imagine if you happen to be African American in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and you're walking around knowing full well how the dominant culture views you. It really is survival of the fittest. And you're at the very bottom of the food chain. So that particular part of one's inner world or psyche, you and I can't enter. Maybe you can, since you're from a different place, to some extent. But the privileges that you have today, people in the 1940s and 50s didn't have. Now, the other thing you need to kind of consider is what happens when you have continuous poverty in the background. Freud, who happened to be the father of psychology to some extent, he had seen his father being pushed around by others because he was a Jew. And it left him a lasting impression. And that's why he was so much against religion, to some extent. Not completely, but the fact that his father was being pushed around simply because he was of Jewish heritage, that in fact haunted him for a while. Now imagine you happen to be black, and first, they don't like your skin color. Second, there is poverty everywhere. And then you get to see your people being attacked on a variety of different levels. Then something strange happens, which is one night there is this noise. You look out the window, there are these people with torches. They're coming your way. They grab your father. They hang a rope on a tree, and they put the other end of the rope to your father's neck. And as a kid, 2, 3, 4-year-old, you kind of watch your father being lynched. And there isn't much you could do. Now, he's not the only kid. He's got brothers and sisters. I'm not quite sure how it feels to kind of look at your father slowly dying. I don't know what the definition of justice in your world is going to be. I'm not sure how you're going to kind of react to this as a 3, 4-year-old. Just trying to tell you the kind of complexity of his inner world. And almost all of us in this class are in the same way, that all of us have had experiences that makes our interior quite complicated. So you look to your mother for foundation, for support. But an African American woman in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, what can they do? No education. No one's going to give you a job. Eventually your kids are taken from you into foster care, they're thrown, and you become addicted to drugs. You have seen your father being lynched. You have seen your brothers and sisters forcibly taken away from you. And then you witness your mom slowly, losing her sanity. That's a lot of things for a kid to handle. Imagine at the age of 10, Malcolm takes a companion, a young girl home. Or say the girl takes Malcolm home and says, "Mom, Dad, this is Malcolm. I really, really like him." And what is the first thing that parents in those days ask? So how's your father? What does he do? Oh, he was lynched. Your mother, drug addict. Your brothers, sisters, yeah, foster care. No parent would ever desire their kid to hang out with you. Your self-esteem goes down, confidence goes down, self-image goes down. The way you value yourself as a human being goes down. What's your grade at the age of 10? F. So what do you do? I mean, if you want to talk about this branch in philosophy called ethics, how do you survive? How do you make money? How do you go find food? How do you pay for it? Well, you steal. If you happen to be Immanuel Kant, if you happen to be Jesus Christ, if you happen to be Moses, you have commandments. Thou shalt not steal. The golden rule. Don't do anything to anyone that's negative, especially if you don't like it to be done to you. What would Immanuel Kant say? What's his categorical imperative? The golden rule. There's a difference between lived philosophy and an armchair philosophy. Go to YouTube, and then in a search engine just write Introduction to Philosophy, and look at all these instructors or professors, as they like to be called, talking about philosophy. You're not going to relate to it, because these are people who have lived a privileged life. They sit in their office and they write. Rarely do they get out. I remember when George Bush Sr., when he was a president for one term, when he was asked, something about people going shopping or going to Safeway, he said, I have never actually gone to Safeway. I don't know what scanning, items mean. When you have food delivered to you, well, that's the sort of mentality you have. You can't really relate to common people. So when it comes to grading Malcolm on his conduct, well, what's his grade? Because he steals. He's also a womanizer. He does all sorts of naughty things. But what's his grade then? Well, he's an F. Imagine if there was a Sigmund Freud out there trying to figure out why Malcolm is the way he is and why he does what he does. But what's his grade then? Well, he needs to be in therapy for the rest of his life, doing medication. Another F. And the way society is today, I'd probably be homeless somewhere, invisible. You and I would probably look at him and pass by him. But then he gets caught. Now remember, when he's in school, what is it that all of us in this class desire to do? We enjoy being liked by other people. Conformity. Simulation. You don't want to stand out as the one who's crazy out there. You want people to pay you attention, to like you, to respect you. That gives you value, confidence. It gives you a society to which you can belong. And that society gives you meaning, gives you worth and value. Now, you need to understand what happens. It's something that all kids go through. You take your kid to high school, you want to drop him off, and let's say you have a crummy car, or a car that's old, it's got all sorts of scratches and dents, and your daughter, your son says, Dad, can you drop me off here? Here? Are you kidding? It's like 5 miles from your school. Yeah, I'd rather walk. I need the exercise. No, you're an embarrassment to your child. He doesn't want his friends to see him. So what is it that Malcolm does not want his so-called new community to see? He doesn't want them to see that he is black. So he creates an aversion, a distraction. How does he do it? He dyes his hair orange. Now, in terms of autonomy, creativity, independence, courage, what's his grade then? F. He's got none of those. So remember, he is no more than maybe 10 or 11. He has no passing grade so far, except the fact that he's been able to survive in a very, very cruel society. Okay. If he was to live in any academic setting in 21st century, you know, instructors would probably go to their bosses and say, I just want this kid out of my classroom. So what happens when he dyes his hair orange? Well, you know, the same reason that Sarah reads fantasy books. Hello, Leila. She reads fantasy books because the world in which she lives, the real world, she touches, she smells, she hears, it's dull. It's uninteresting. It's clipped her wings. And she's so young. And she says, why is my world this way? I'm young, I want to fly, and yet I can't. So he is called an orange poodle. Now people talk about you. Now people look at you. Even though they make fun of you. At least they're not that mean to you. At least you have some people who come to you, look at you, talk to you, despite making fun of you. That raises your value a little bit. And then he sits in a class, and one of his instructors asks him, so what do you want to be, Malcolm? And he says, well, I want to be a lawyer. Lawyer? I think you have forgotten your skin color. You can't be a lawyer. The system won't allow people like you to become lawyers. Now, you know, if this comment came from a stranger, it would be okay. But it came from a teacher that Malcolm actually liked and respected. So whatever care, love, respect he had inside him for someone who looked not so much like him, that also vanished. He robs, he gets caught, he's sent to prison. Even in prison, he continues to dye his hair orange or blonde. Until one day someone confronts him and says, some African American guy says, what's wrong with you? Why can't you just like yourself the way you are? Now, I don't know if any of you in this class have ever had your foundation shattered or broken. If you have lost your faith, if you have lost your trust, if you loved someone and they broke your heart and you said, I am never going to love again. If you have lost your ability to care. Do you know what happens when someone comes to you and wants to care for you? You will push them away. So next time someone mentions the name Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., right? Or Angela Davis. You know, it's kind of like the third commandment in Judaism. You shall not speak of God or mention God's name in vain. Don't mention their names. They're far too holy for the human tongue. Because these people have gone through things and have had emotions that you and I just don't have access to. What's his grade in prison? Paula? Who ends up in prison? people who are not socialized. Sometimes when they're violent. F. Would you want to go out with someone like this? Of course not. Would you allow your daughter to date someone like this? Of course not. Why would society desire to invest money in people like him? Well, no society would. Right. I don't know how, I don't know why, but the person who begins to talk to Malcolm in prison finally has a way to get through him. I don't know how it happens. You know, imagine the prodigal son we talked about a few weeks ago, that there comes a point where you say, what am I doing here, living with the pigs and the cows? Why don't I go back to my father? You know, it's not that none of us in this class have those insights. Those insights never morph into action. It's not that you never say to yourself, I'm going to sit and write a really, really good essay for whatever the class may be. It's a great fantasy, a great imagination. It just never morphs into will, into action. So you just write a crummy paragraph and send it in. Now there is another thing that you need to understand about Malcolm, and that's this. He falls in love with a man he had never seen, never heard of. His name is Elijah Muhammad. I have never seen Socrates, and yet when I read the dialogues of Plato, I am inspired. I don't even know if Jesus Christ actually existed, but when I read the Gospels, I said, man, I wish there was someone who would walk into my life who would be like him. All of us in this class desire fantasy, someone who is bigger than life. Now, you and I are not very lucky to meet those people. And if once in a while they come by, we don't have the eyes that sees. So what happens is Malcolm slowly begins to embrace his heritage. Do you know what it takes to be proud of your history? I'm not talking about superficially. I mean really, really understanding it. You know, when you go to AA meetings, the person who heads the group, 12, 13, 14, 20 people, you know what this guy talks about, or this woman? You know what they talk about? Their mistakes. The things they were ashamed of thinking about, feeling about, talking about. All those mistakes now become bullet points, powerhouses, components of transformation. You know, it's really, really difficult to find your cross, be willing to carry it in public where everyone can see. Where you raise your hand and you say, I am a drunk, and let me tell you why. These are all the reasons why I eventually moved towards the bottle. Let me tell you what happened when I became a drunk. I began to be abusive towards my kids, towards my wife, towards my parents, my husband. I began to gamble. These are the crosses you carry, and you carry them proudly. So next time you hear the name Malcolm X, you're talking about the Messiah, the Jesus Christ of the 20th century. Because later on you'll see he just didn't carry his own cross. He not only carried the cross for the black people, but eventually the white people as well. This is not an ordinary human being. I'm trying to tell you how a person who has an F eventually gets an A. And he doesn't need to go to Yale or Harvard. He doesn't need to write essays. He doesn't need to read books. He pays attention to his own experiences. He's educated in a completely different way. You know, the word education means to bring out. It's Latin. But you need to have something interesting about you that needs to be brought out. And I assure you, every human being does. It just takes a lot of work. Because to educate someone means that somebody who is not you, other than you, has to recognize something inside you that you yourself don't recognize. Or if you do recognize, you don't want to, well, be responsible for it because it burdens you. So you enjoy distracting yourself. Some of you in this class are honest enough as you are writing your essays to know full well you're doing a really, really crummy job. Some of you even know that you didn't submit your work, that you got an F, but you don't like to really think about it. It's far too burdensome. You say, well, I'll do it next week. Someone out on the outside needs to look at you, see something interesting about you, and then say to themselves, I am willing to spend my time, my energy on this person to bring out what they have pushed down. Of course, today we call it therapy, which usually doesn't work well. Because you need to fall in love with your therapist. But these days, it's crossing lines. If you don't fall in love with Socrates, well, you can't get what Socrates has. If you don't fall in love with Jesus, well, damn, you're not going to leave your wife and kids.